Erin Ogunke. Hi, Erin.
Hi, Hexie.
We're starting with troubling revelations about the assailant behind Saturday night's terror attack here in Paris.
Yeah, that's right. Now, as a reminder, this Saturday, a man armed with both a knife and a hammer killed one person and injured two others near the Eiffel Tower. Libération this morning asks if the attack really was unpredictable, and that's because the assailant's profile was essentially unprecedented. And the fact that he was already on France's terror watch list, he had also spent 4 years in prison for planning a terrorist attack in the past, and still he was able to act on his radical ideology. He had also been receiving care for psychiatric issues and was able to convince authorities and health workers visibly that he had de-radicalized himself. Now, Le Parisien, also known as Aujourd'hui en France, also asks if Saturday's attack was avoidable. Today's editorial, nonetheless, arguing that France, here on the left, that France is neither naive nor laxist, but adapting to a threat that still remains relatively new, and that is lone wolf attackers being radicalized on social media websites. This piece says that Saturday's attack then shines a light also on the fact that some 300 people convicted of terror offenses are currently sitting in French prisons and, of course, will one day be released. And despite de-radicalization programs and other recent efforts, according to the editorialist in Le Parisien, the justice and penal systems here in France still are not ready, not well enough equipped to deal with the possible consequences.
Meanwhile, Erin, far-right parties from across Europe gathered in Florence in Italy over the weekend. What are the papers saying about that?
Well, Politico today, Haxi, writes that anti-EU hardliners, uniting, of course, under the Identity and Democracy group, gathered in that Italian city to kick off the 2024 European elections campaigns. Now, they were galvanized, of course, by the surprise win in late November of Geert Wilders in general elections in the Netherlands. So they vowed to change the political dynamic in Brussels before some 2,000 supporters, as Politico tells us, with 17 speakers taking to the stage to voice Eurosceptic tropes and other far-right talking points that, we're relatively accustomed to hearing now. That's criticism of Islam, illegal migration, migration and political correctness. Italian paper La Repubblica described the gathering as a, quote, black parade against Europe, immigrants, and the left, also pointing out that many of Matteo Salvini's, quote, patriotic friends are also essentially calling for Ukraine's surrender to Russia, though the paper does note that Geert Wilders and Marine Le Pen, two far-right heavyweights on the continent, were actually noticeably absent from this gathering. Independent paper here in France, though, Mediapart, does point out, or does focus rather, on an important French attendee who was there, and that's Marine Le Pen's successor as the president of the far-right National Rally Party, Jordan Bardella. The paper saying that his presence there, alongside his radical allies who had transphobic, conspiracy theory-laced, pro-Russian and ethno-nationalist speeches, was essentially a far cry away from the party, the National Rally Party's attempts in recent years to normalize itself, to soften its image.
And in some other news, Erin, the COP28 climate summit continues in Dubai. How it's going, it very much depends on who you ask.
Yeah, that's right. Some are suggesting that this conference is going quite well. I'll start with the Emirati paper, The National, which focuses on the multi-million-dollar pledge towards eradicating neglected tropical diseases in developing countries. It's kind of bizarre that that's the front page focus on a climate summit, but they are hailing that as a victory. The paper also saying that the summit got off to a rare positive start with a key announcement on that deal to finance loss and damage, which of course involves funding a fund to assist vulnerable nations cope with the effects of climate change. French paper La Croix, in a surprising kind of editorial twist, if you will, here on its front page, hails pledges and engagements thus far. They hail, of course, that loss and damage deal, saying that it brings hope there to the climate summits. Now here they go more into detail about what these engagements are worth. It hails pledges like some 20 countries' objectives to triple nuclear power, to reduce methane emissions, and to increase renewable energy, though La Croix does, of course, acknowledge that all of these pledges, promises, don't have the same significance. Some of them are just about starting negotiations, which, of course, won't necessarily lead to anything, while others are voluntary agreements with no legal mechanisms for enforcement.
The head of the summit, meanwhile, Erin, sparking some controversy of his own.
Yeah, that's because, as The Guardian reports today, the United Arab Emirates' Sultan Al Jaber claimed that there is, quote, no science indicating that phasing out fossil fuels is necessary in order to restrict global temperature increases to 1.5 degrees Celsius. He also said that doing this would not allow for sustainable development unless, I quote, you want to take the world back into caves. Now, he actually made these comments during a live event before the summit in late November, though they were just now picked up by the press. The Guardian also pointing out that Al Jaber, of course, is the chief executive of the UAE's state oil company, which, of course, many see as a conflict of interest and a barrier then to really being able to pursue meaningful action, at least at this year's climate summit.
And you're finishing up, Erin, with Oxford University Press's Word of the Year. What is it?
That's right, Axie. The publisher of the Oxford English Dictionary has decided that Rizz, R-I-Z-Z, is the most important word of 2023. Now, it is derived from the word charisma, as the New York Times tells us today. The American paper also pointing out that it is definitely a Generation Z slang term denoting style, charm, even attractiveness. Now, it beat contenders like situationship, de-influencing, and even Swiftie, which of course is a reference to die-hard fans of American pop star Taylor Swift. The president of Oxford Languages explained in the New York Times his choice by saying that it reflects how social media has essentially increased the pace of language change. He says it's moved from being a social media phrase into the mainstream in part because it's fun to say. So I think it's probably fair to say that Rizz does indeed have Rizz.
A press review full of Rizz. I'm not sure if I'm using that correctly.
I hope so.
I hope so too. I'm sure some Gen Zers online will correct me if I'm wrong. Erin Agunke with the press review today. Thank you very much.